Everybody, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. I'm one of the staff members at the Fundraising School in the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And we're absolutely delighted to have you back with us again for Fridays with the Fundraising School. This has been a development that has occurred under the umbrella of TFRS at your desk, which is our school's 24/7, always open response now that we're in the midst of the pandemic. We are just absolutely delighted to bring you this free 1 hour conversation once a month in the months when we don't have one of our normal fundraising school webinars. And again, we often have guest speakers and select topics, but we don't want to limit the conversation to those topics. We bring in our guest speakers so that we can center in on a couple of important subjects, on questions that we're hearing about at the fundraising schools. We train nationally and across the world, but we also want to make sure that you can ask any question, share any concern that you have, and we can answer that, and our guests can answer that as well. They have a wide range of expertise, not just the topics that they are bringing to us here today. So again, at the Fundraising School, we do have these conversations. We call them webinars. They're not really webinars with presentations, but more an opportunity for you to share with us. Don't forget about our podcasts. Those are coming out every Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, and the topics are tailored for pandemic-related fundraising. So be sure you're taking advantage of that free activity. We have our courses online, and we're glad to see many of you registering for those. And just this week, my colleague, Dr. Jen Shaker, and I taught in person. And for about the first 5 minutes, it was a little weird. And then the rest of the 3 days, it was awesome. And, you know, one of the phrases in fundraising research is warm glow. That we give our donors a chance to experience the warm glow. There was a lot of warm glow in that room because people were just thrilled to be back together in person. We had 14 people for our leadership course, which is my way of reminding you, we do have courses in person in Indianapolis. There are 7 of them remaining in this calendar year and more scheduled into the next year. And yes, we are exploring other cities now, as long as it's allowed by local and state federal policy. As long as that's allowed by Indiana University policy, we're looking for other locations across the United States to bring the fundraising school to you in person. That's going to be very incremental, very safe, very careful, but just stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we have our online courses, we have these conversations, and don't forget our scholarship, our crisis response scholarship. You can take one course for a 50% discount. So that's us, now you. And it's my absolute delight to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Sarah Nathan. Dr. Nathan is the Associate Director of the Fundraising School. She oversees our curriculum development and also leads our very talented faculty. And one of our newest faculty members, we're so thrilled, and I am just so honored to serve alongside today, Delphia Ridley. And Delphia was so gracious to welcome me as the Fundraising School expanded into Houston in 2018. And 2019 through her leadership position in the community. I was Bill Bag of Donuts to her, and she took that meeting anyway. And I will always be grateful because now we not only have a new professional friend, we have a new professional colleague. Delphia's experience and expertise is just extraordinary. As she has been a fundraiser, get this, United Way, Girl Scouts, the Smithsonian, and now a national fundraising consultant. So who wants to go next, right? I mean, this is an extraordinarily talented colleague. And today she's here to talk about the subject of collaboration. That, of course, is a significant topic now amidst the pandemic, as nonprofits are being invited more than ever before to at least partner, collaborate, yes, maybe even merge. And Delphia has significant expertise across her career, including the crucible that was Hurricane Harvey. Delphia was residing in Houston during that hurricane, in the aftermath of that hurricane, and she observed significant collaboration happening in the aftermath of that terrible storm, which is also going to be the focus of a course she's going to teach for us in our next current affairs fundraising series. We had one this summer. We can bring those to you in a custom training format. 5 new courses will start next January, including Delphia's course on collaboration. We also expect to be joined later on by Lisa Bennett, and she will be talking to us about planned giving. So welcome. I'm going to mute my microphone. I'm going to learn from Delphia and from Lisa today. I might chime in with some questions and comments along the way, but now glad to share the microphone with Dr. Nathan.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. It's Fun to see where you're joining us from. You can put that in the chat box if you haven't. I want to give a special shout out to a couple of friends I see with us. Lots of friends from Indiana. Anjali from Austin, Texas, who has come to see us many times in Indianapolis. Stephen from Minot, North Dakota. Go North Dakota. That's my parents' hometown. Glad that you're with us today. Friends from California and New Mexico, Texas, Salt Lake City, welcome. Glad that you're with us. So Delphia, here we are at the end of August. We're 6 months into this pandemic. I think, 6 months ago, we thought we wouldn't be here, but here we are. Just to get us started, tell us what's on your mind? What are you thinking and feeling these days?
Well, it's a very different world that we live in now, particularly, I think, for nonprofits, because a couple of my colleagues have said to me, we didn't know whether to just stop asking. We didn't know whether to close our doors. We weren't quite sure how to respond to this, especially in the first 60 days. It was pretty tough, not only for our industry, but for the entire world. I think we're feeling a little more confident as we kind of adjust to our new environment. And I think that we would be smart to start thinking of post-pandemic opportunities. And as Bill has said, one of the things that I have been a strong advocate of is collaboration. I just believe that we could, if we focus on the needs of the community and what the community needs wherever we live, that we would have more impact if we would sit down at the table together. For example, if you are a food pantry, then and we're in this pandemic where people have lost jobs, is there opportunity to take some of the restaurant workers and have them help out at the food pantry and find a donor who not only will donate to the food pantry, but also to this kind of workforce and transition of skills. So I think that just thinking in a different way is where we're going to be, Sarah, once we're post-pandemic.
Yeah. So thinking about the opportunities that we have during this time, I mean, you already mentioned the idea of collaboration, and already a really nice example of how that might happen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experiences with nonprofits, collaborations, mergers and acquisitions, and anything else you kind of want to share about why this might be just the right time for nonprofits to be thinking about that?
Well, I think the time is right because donors are being pulled in so many different ways. I've been in conversations with donors where they have said, I've had 10 people talk to me today and all of their needs are valid, but I can't give to all 10 people. So I think that with that background, we have to start thinking about what are some of the innovative ways that we can work together. I've given the example before of some lessons that were learned after Harvey in Houston. And Bill, no, I wasn't in Houston, although I felt like I was in Houston doing Harvey, but I certainly was in the middle of this pandemic in Houston. And the good news is that we did learn some lessons from Harvey, particularly at the United Way, where the United Way had a Harvey Fund. The Greater Houston Community Foundation had a Harvey Fund, and then the plethora of 27,000 nonprofits in Houston all were trying to have a Harvey Fund. And as a result of that, donors felt pressured, I think, to do one or the other, whereas since we didn't want that to occur during this pandemic, the Greater Houston Community Foundation and United Way, we decided to collaborate together to do a fundraising campaign. And it takes a lot of trust to do that, Sarah, because we had to actually exchange donor information. So we had to trust that they would not steal our donors because, you know, we're still all human, right? We love our communities, we love our but, you know, don't take my donor, right? Because sometimes I think we come from a position of scarcity rather than abundance. And so taking this approach of abundance and trust, when I left United Way a couple of weeks ago, we had raised a total of $17 million in 4 months for the COVID-19 relief fund for Houston.
Wow.
And we're able to really, I mean, I recognize that that's like a teaspoon of water in the ocean, but that teaspoon made a difference in the lives of the people that we were able to touch.
Wow. That's a great story. And I really appreciate that emphasis on trust, trusting our colleagues across the sector to do this really important work and have a bigger difference probably with that 17 million than if everyone was doing their own little campaigns spread out across the area. Well, one of the questions that we had from our participants, or from one of our participants, is to learn a little bit more about these community partnerships. And can you give us some advice for how we can move from that competition mindset or that scarcity mindset, to a more collaborative working relationship?
Well, I think most people who work in nonprofit, we want to serve others. And I think if we start looking through a lens of how can we serve others and how can we do that better together? And you can't serve everybody, but thinking of what is it that we do that we're the best of, and who else in that space we believe is quote unquote right now competition, but also provides very similar service, that if we combine those services together, how would we have a better impact? It does take starting off with a conversation. And I suggest that the first step is to talk to the board about it. Because I think that they're going to certainly have to have buy-in that this is the best thing for the community. It is not easy to get out of your own nonprofit, but I think talking to your board about, you know, we may provide a particular service. Let's say that we provide some service. I'm going to go back to food because of the food deserts and the scarcity. We're able to provide, meals to seniors, but there is another organization that goes in and checks on them or helps them with things around the house. And we're both having a very similar donor base. And how can we work together to maybe even add a third service that is more intergenerational, and that maybe there's a school that you can help teenagers become partners with seniors, and that they call them, they run by and they go by and see them. I mean, I just think you have to look at this through the lens of what's needed to elevate the community. And starting with the board is the first step once you've done your assessment of how you can have better impact.
Mm-hmm. And since we have a bunch of fundraisers with us today, tell us a little bit then what's the fundraiser's role in this? How can fundraisers be communicating and talking to donors about these opportunities for collaboration and what it means for the donors?
Well, from my experience, and I'm going to talk about the recent experience with the COVID Relief Fund, we got notes from donors saying, thank you so much. We really appreciate your being a collaborator, because we give to both organizations and now we don't feel as if we have to make that decision in terms of one or the other. And they felt so much better about giving. And I think donors really, from my experience, they were just grateful. And that they didn't have to make that, they didn't have to do an either or, and they were in a position to really have a deeper impact. And so I think that donors really crave this. I think we don't give donors, they're so much more sophisticated than they were, Sarah, when I started 30 years ago. They really want to know what the impact is. And I think if our emphasis stays on the community and having a deeper impact in the community, I think donors will be very happy and willing to sometimes even give more. We got, and don't quote me on this, but I recall we got at least 5 $1 million gifts from people who had not given $1 million before. So I think that is a testimony of how much donors appreciate collaboration, and they don't have to do an either or situation.
That's amazing. But more impact in the community, and it's better for donors. Donors, therefore, get to have more impact with their philanthropic gifts. Very, very cool. Great. Well, our dear TFRS colleague and faculty member, Lisa Bennett, has joined us. So I'm going to turn to Lisa for a minute, and then don't forget to put your questions in the chat box for us. So welcome, Lisa. We're so glad that you are with us this afternoon. And, you know, I started off by asking Delphia this question, and I'll ask you the same. We're 6 months into the pandemic. How are you feeling? What are you seeing out there? What are you thinking about right now at this point in the pandemic? Lisa, go ahead and unmute yourself if you can.
This is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Hi. I'm very glad to join you today, and I apologize for the late joining. But how are you all?
We're doing great. Yeah. So tell us what you're seeing and feeling out there, working in the field 6 months into the pandemic.
Well, some things are the same, and some things have changed dramatically. I would say that the things that our previous speaker was talking about in terms of donors looking for meaning and they want to find impact, that has been true. It is increasingly true, as she mentioned, and it continues to be a strong factor. I think things have changed in that there are more uncertainties in the economic situation than we have seen in the past. People are feeling less confident about their own financial situation, so they feel some feel less comfortable with commitments.
And Lisa, we always love it when you do the planned giving lesson in the fundraising school classroom. And we had a lot of questions submitted in advance about planned giving. So, you know, what are you seeing right now in terms of donors' interests in planned giving, how organizations are talking to donors about that, you know, possibly sensitive topic during this time?
Sure. COVID-19 pandemic has been a very interesting and unprecedented situation in at least in living memory. Many people are feeling quite closer to their own mortality as they face numbers of, you know, deaths in the community, and we all have to take the measures to stop the spread of the pandemic. And so, to that extent, more people are willing to take steps to start their estate planning. They're thinking about it more than they ever have. And really, that's what has kept people back. I think we only have just over half of American adults have estate plans. And I'm hoping that maybe that number will grow as people just, you know, get used to the idea that we're all mortal and that it's better to plan ahead because we don't know what's going to happen. So I hope we're going to be seeing some more of that. promoting planned giving, I think donors appreciate it when organizations are completely honest and transparent, and to actually address the situation in materials and communications, to address the situation of uncertainty, of mortality, of planning for the future in uncertain times. It's hard to do, but we need to do it. That organizations that take that kind of, that do address it, that don't pretend that it has, don't pretend that it's not there. I think that donors appreciate that a great deal.
And do you have any suggestions for, how we should be, marketing planned giving options to donors right now? We can't go visit them. We can't see them at the scholarship dinner at the beginning of the academic year or anything like that. How should we be talking to our donors about these opportunities right now?
Well, you ask an interesting question, because planned giving has always been a unique part of our development efforts, because on the one hand, we can promote planned giving in a very mass way in our publications, on our websites, through targeted mailings, but that's fairly mass and impersonal. But once somebody shows an interest, whether they attend a webinar, which is one way of doing this, whether they attend a webinar on planned giving, or whether they respond to something in the mail or respond on the website, it becomes a highly personal and one-on-one kind of thing. So in my experience here, many people are becoming accustomed to the Zoom mentality, the Zoom method of communication. And that does allow you to see a person's face and to be one-on-one, fairly close with them. But the nice thing about Zoom is when you've found out enough, say you're responding to somebody's inquiry. Now at that point, they have identified themselves as interested, but you don't know anything about them. So as a fundraiser, as a development officer, you need to respond and find out a bit more about what their interest is, what the state of their estate planning happens to be, how far along are they, have they done it yet and they're just revising it, or have they never done it and they're just thinking about it for the first time? Have they, are they thinking about your organization or just estate planning in general? And so, and are they a donor already, or have they never been a donor? All these kinds of questions. As a development officer, kind of the discovery period for planned giving. When you've gotten some more information from them, and say they have done it before, and they're maybe wanting to change their estate plans, or say they have been a long-time donor, so by definition maybe a better prospect for planned giving, and they want to just explore some ideas with you. If you have the knowledge in-house, whether your own knowledge as a development officer, or if you have a planned giving professional in-house, that's the time to set up a 2- or 3-way call, a Zoom meeting, and you might include their financial planner as well, so that you can have 3 or maybe even 4 if you need to have one of their children on, or on our side, on the organization side, development officer and planned giving officer, something like that, where you can have several people, quote unquote, in the room at the same time, and it can get, it's very gentle and careful, but it can get quite personal at that point to find out what their needs are. Because planned giving essentially is a way to meet the estate planning or tax situation of a donor, while at the same time giving their life more meaning, and this is again back to the meaning, by allowing them to provide for their favorite or one of their favorite causes. So I would say that the first step is the mass marketing, however you choose to do that. And the second step would be finding out more about the people who respond. So an informational webinar, the same way we used to do sort of, planned giving seminars, just do a planned giving webinar, see who shows up. And that makes some sense in terms of getting people to self-identify. But at that point, have it get highly personal as quickly as possible, and try to meet the donor's needs, find out what they are. So that's what I would say about how do you talk about it. The topic is the same. How you talk about it is, we have to use our new tools because we can't get face-to-face in the same room with someone. Not as easily anyway. I guess we could if we were 6 or 8 feet apart with masks on, but frankly, I'd rather be in a Zoom meeting so I can see their whole face. And it allows them to tie in their planner or their child from another state or whatever much more easily than it used to be. So that's how you would go about it. And it comes down to what medium are we going to use? What medium do we have access to nowadays? But the material is the same. The sense of urgency may be a little greater, and that only helps us.
Thanks, Lisa. Bill?
Well, Lisa, thank you so much. And it's a delight to have you with us. And again, Lisa has been a veteran member of our faculty going back to the days of our founder, Dr. Henry Rosso. And she's a very successful, highly sought after fundraising consultant based on the West Coast of the continental United States. So Lisa, an absolute delight to have you with us. Sarah, I'd like to ask both Delphia and Lisa kind of the same question in their own context. So Delphia, if I could go to you first, please. People always kind of want to know just how do I get started, right? So, what does that first conversation look like for collaboration? And maybe you remember those early conversations at the United Way when you reached out to your good friends at the Community Foundation and said, why are we both raising money for the pandemic? Is there a way that we can bring this together, or elsewhere that you've seen that in your career? So if I'm in my one particular nonprofit as a fundraiser, perhaps as an executive director, we sometimes have CEOs in these courses as well. What does that first conversation look like to try to get the process started? And then Lisa, I'm going to ask you a similar question in a moment.
Had to unmute myself. Did I do it? Yeah. So the first, with the COVID Relief Fund, we actually started with the CEO of the United Way calling the CEO of the Community Foundation and just having a conversation. And because they'd had the Harvey experience, they were looking for opportunities to mitigate some of the challenges that they had during Harvey. And again, it was, as Sarah said, trust. How can we do this? And so once they decided that it was probably doable, they then each went to their own chair of their board. And they said, we're on board with trying to do this collaboratively rather than separately because we have this prior experience. We think we can raise more money. And then there was a discussion of, so how much money can we raise? And what's interesting, Bill, is that what they thought they could raise, they did raise. As a matter of fact, I think they exceeded it a little bit. But once they got the board chairs to agree, because it just made sense, then they went to the full board and canvassed the board. The board agreed. There were no naysayers. And as you know, the United Way kicks off their corporate campaign in September every year. And so we had to go, and we have a chair of that campaign. So I actually called him up and I said, I recognize that this is right before the campaign season, and under normal circumstances, we'd be planning for our campaign, but we have this urgent issue in our community. And before I could finish the sentence, he said, let's do it. Let's work with the Community Foundation to make this bigger and better. And then we had to set up the process. And I have to say, that was probably, the decision to do it was so much easier than trying to figure out the process. And we had little hiccups along the way, like who's gonna thank the donor, who's gonna set up the fiscal agent to receive the funds, who signs the letters, those kinds of things that we never really had to think about jointly before. But in a month or so, we had all of that worked out. And the one thing I love about my colleagues in this industry, that we come from a heart of collaboration and trust. And I think that makes it a lot easier in our industry than, others.
Delphi, thank you so much for that. And a question I'm going to have for you later, so I'll let you think about this one a little bit, maybe a little harder, is like, okay, who gets what share of the money? So give that one some thought for a second as I turn back to Lisa. And Lisa, kind of same question. I know you were explaining so well about how we get started maybe at a macro level with webinars and mailings and just creating the awareness that plan giving is a possibility. I would invite you to take our participants here today. Think about if I'm in a Zoom meeting like this and Sarah is my donor, let's say. Sarah, if we can role play here for a moment. And whether Sarah chooses to invite her SO or not, maybe they're both on the screen together, maybe it's just Sarah. And she's a longtime donor to the organization. What am I listening for that could lead to a discussion about planned giving, or knowing that we're always fundraising with empathy, and now more than ever before because of the pandemic, checking in with our donor about their health and their family members, their economic situation, and so forth. And we don't want to seem morose, bringing giving. What tips do you have as we're fundraising on Zoom to try to start that conversation with planned giving, or what do we listen to when we're in this virtual environment?
Well, one of the things, thank you, Bill, that's a good question. One of the things that I always listen for is, what do they care about what we do? And so I should know about that already if I'm headed into a planned giving conversation. But if it's not, if they're on an individual Zoom call with me, and I know it's going to be about planned giving, then that's a different place than if I'm just on a Zoom call with them as a major donor and exploring whether there might be interest. But I want to find out, some of the key questions that Jim Hodge put together about key questions of significance. What is the legacy you want to leave? If you've been a donor with us for 28 years, what do you see ahead for the next 28 years? And they may or may not be alive, but what do you want to teach your children about philanthropy, and how does this agency fit into that? That sort of thing. What sort of programs would you like to see get continued even after you're no longer able to support them on an annual basis? So the idea of meaning, the idea of legacy, the idea but impact it's not so immediate. It's not like setting up the COVID fund and you're making grants right away, or in our area, the fire fund. We have so many fires, our community foundations have COVID funds and they have fire funds. Anyway, and those are immediate sorts of grants that are made, and we can tell stories. Planned giving is a little different because it's a longer term impact that the person might never see. So trying to get at the heart of their values. You mentioned empathy, Bill, in your question. So trying to develop enough of a sense of empathy with the donor that you can sort of feel how they feel, whether they feel uncertain, whether they feel confident. Someone also mentioned trust. It's such an important part of this, and it becomes even more important, the trustworthiness of the organization in the mind of the donor, to be able to manage a planned gift well, to ensure that the board over the long term will continue and always honor the wishes of that donor long after they're gone. So those become very important in a conversation if you're on the phone with your major donor or on a Zoom call. Say, do you have an estate plan? Just asking because you've been a donor so long. I'm just curious, do you and your husband have an estate plan? Have you done your estate planning? And then they'll probably say yes. And you want a gift too, don't you? And say, of course we do. Of course we'd like to be part of your estate plan because we consider you part of our family. We'd like you to consider us part of your family too, as you do your estate planning. And just positioning it like that. We do consider these donors, longtime donors and major donors, part of our family as a nonprofit, as an agency doing good work in the community. They are part of our family, our network, our constituency circle. close-in members. And so we would like them to consider us the same way. Because most people say, oh, I just want to leave money to my family. And that's how you respond to that. But the idea is get into their heart and find out what's important to them about their legacy, about their impact in the community. Wow, you've lived in this community for 40, how many years now? 42 years. You've probably seen a lot of changes. What do you anticipate for the next 42 years? What will the challenges be? How do you see our agency growing and changing to be able to meet those challenges? What would you like to do to help us do that, to grow and change to meet the challenges we can't even foresee at this point? Would you consider something like a planned gift or a gift through your estate to help us do that over the years and decades to come? And you just have to ask the question, would you be willing to consider? May I ask whether you've considered this? I mean, using permission, using questions to get them to say, well, yeah, we could talk about it. Or, yeah, I haven't considered that, but so how do you work it at this agency? And that opens the door. But those permission kinds of questions, first of all, finding out where their heart is, what they care about, what they're concerned about, whether it's on your side, the agency side, the community side, or whether it's on their side, my family. I worry about this with respect to my estate or my wife or my kids or my grandkids. So whatever it is, find out what's on their mind, what's on their heart, and then see if a planned giving conversation might actually help them meet their own goals. So that's how I do it. I come up with beforehand. I will come up based on their status that I know so far. I will come up with 3 or 4 key questions I need to ask and get the answers to during this conversation. I always have what I call a TWE, to what end? To what end am I having this conversation? If it's just a conversation with a major donor and I don't know anything about their interest or status of estate planning, then I'm going to ask different questions than if it's a conversation that they responded to my response, to their response to my webinar, and they've asked some specific questions via email, and we've set up this more targeted meeting with their significant other or their tax advisor or whatever. I mean, that's later in the process. It's usually a number of conversations, but you have to keep it going. As a development officer, it stays in your court to keep the process moving forward. Does that address what you were asking, Bill?
Absolutely, Lisa. And Sarah, I know you have additional questions, and I'm also looking forward to Delphia's answer to, when do we get to discuss the money. And we want to also encourage our participants here today, if you have questions on these topics of collaboration or planned giving. And again, this is a conversation. We have 2 national fundraising experts with you here live today. Ask questions about anything going on with fundraising right now. And Delphia and Lisa will be glad to address those for you. But Sarah, I can say anecdotally, a good friend of mine is in the life insurance business, and she was telling me, for better or worse, during the pandemic, their business is going up and up as more people are being confronted, with the illness, and we hear about fatalities and such, which tells us the season is right for planned giving. But Sarah, I wanted to go back to you if you wanted to address more questions, share from our participants, or allow Delphia to respond to that next question.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things, because I do want to hear Delphia's answer to that question. I am reminded of a conversation, Bill, you and I had just yesterday with one of our other TFRS faculty members, who's also a certified financial planner, who said to us, the best planned gift is when the client or the donor's financial interests marry their philanthropic interests. And that's really where that magic happens for those planned gifts of people who, have a lot of assets that they're planning for at the end of their lifetime. So really finding that kind of sweet spot between those 2 things is really great. And Lisa, I loved all of your suggestions about how you can just simply ask in a kind way whether or not you can have a conversation about planned giving. So I know that did answer some of the questions we had coming in. Another question that we had coming in quickly about planned giving is about especially our smaller nonprofits and our friends in small shops who are with us today, who might not have a planned giving officer or simply just don't have all of those resources inside the organization. How can they get access to that expertise? And where are some of those resources for them? So I'll let you both answer, and also maybe we can highlight the important role of community foundations in helping our friends in small shops do planned giving. So Lisa or Delphia, given your long experience too working in community philanthropy. Delphia, I think.
Am I on?
Yeah, Lisa. Yep. Go ahead.
Why don't you go first, Delphia?
Well, Lisa is certainly the expert. One of the things, even though I have a law degree, I am not a planned giving expert the way Lisa is. But when I started off with my kind of career and learned that, this whole area of planned giving, because I did not take that course in law school, we started off as a small shop, just asking people to leave us in their will and to tell us, and setting up kind of a legacy society where, once or twice a year, we tried to bring them together. Or, small shops, you don't have the resources, you don't have the people, even just having the board call people and say, thank you. We understand that you included us in your will. And you gave us the right to publicize that. So thank you. I mean, that's the first step, is in all of your material, say, would you remember us in your will and let us know? And that to me is an easy step. And you really need no expertise to do it. The other thing that I did when I worked at Texas Children's Hospital, because again, we didn't have the resources to have an expert, I put together a planned giving council, and these were competitors, lawyers, CPAs, various people, financial planners. And we brought them together, quite frankly, to educate them about what we were doing at the Children's Hospital. And then they kind of acted as the catalyst to tell their clients. And we were stunned when we got more than $1 million gift from a woman who had never given to us, only because she was an only child, her parents were deceased, she had no other family members, and she asked her advisor, what should she do about her estate? And because this particular advisor was part of our planned giving, he didn't say, because he couldn't say give to a particular agent, he said, but what is it again, Lisa? What's your interest? And she said, I really love children. And he said, well, what about Texas Children's Hospital? And we ended up getting the gift.
Wow. Those are really great suggestions, Delphia, and examples. Most planned gifts are gifts in a will. Lisa?
I'm just going to interject quickly. I am never shooting baskets, shooting pool, or playing cards with Delphia. I don't know that much about planned giving. I'm no expert. And then here's two amazing, excellent recommendations. So
yes, and those recommendations are absolutely correct. Almost all of the gifts that come in planned giving come in as a gift in a will. It's not the only way to do it, but boy, I'll tell you, it's the least painful because there's no immediate outlay for the family. So more people will do that. It's simpler. It's available to everybody. So I totally agree with that. I was writing this down and thinking, okay, Legacy Society, and I guess Jennifer or somebody was mentioning earlier, how do you do recognition when there's, during COVID? Well, frankly, most agencies, and I'm especially talking about the small ones that you were trying to get at here, they're not going to put together a whole event just for their legacy folks. That's for the universities, the art museum, stuff like that. But most of our small agencies, just first of all, don't have the staff and shouldn't be putting it into, I don't know, glitz-heavy events to thank, and donors don't want that anyway. Donors they know you're a small agency doing good community work. They don't want you wasting their time or their money, your time, their money, whatever, on events. But however we have figured out, and there are a myriad ways of recognizing, Delphia mentioned one. I think that it's, that you've allowed us to mention you in our, thank you for being part of our Legacy Society. You've allowed us or given us permission to print your name in our, whatever it is, brochure on our website or whatever. As a member of this Legacy Society, that is huge. And if people are willing to, the Legacy Society isn't the ladies who lunch. I mean, it's the people who care enough. It's a group of like-minded, like-hearted people who care enough about the agency to think of its long-term survival and growth and effectiveness. So the society is more of a, what can you do for each of these individuals that'll make them feel good ongoing that they've done this? One of the things that we need to be very aware of is that people will make a will, and then the thing that antagonizes the trust attorneys is that they won't update it. So the key thing is asking somebody not only have you made your will, have you arranged for your estate plans, but have you updated them recently if there have been any family changes or changes in your preferences for charitable bequests? Have you updated them? Are you maintaining them? It's not just planting the garden, it's maintaining that garden, because they need to continue. Oh, we are in your will. Okay, is this the actual legal name you've used? Good. We want you to, make sure, we want to make sure that it's the correct name. So anyway, that's
yeah, Lisa, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you're a small shop, it's asking the right questions. It's making the donors feel good. The idea that Delphia came up with of the plan giving counsel, Stanford did that with their law school, the third, law school, 3 years. Yeah, the third year law students. The development office went over to the law school and said, hey, would you guys, regardless of what field of law you're going into, would you like the latest information each year on charitable estate planning? And so some people said yes, and they continued to get this information of updates in charitable tax law year after year after year. And one of the biggest gifts they ever got was like the one that Delphia described. It was a lady who had no other family, and she had tens of millions of dollars to give, and the person who was the professional said, oh, you care about, I forget what it was. Well, have you considered Stanford, because their program does that? And she left her money to Stanford and 4 other organizations. They got 1/5 of the estate. But that's a really key thing is a small organization can assemble a group of allied professionals, as we call them, who are willing to just get information from you. And they're never going to agree, they're never going to commit to promoting your organization or its plant giving program, but they will, remember you when somebody cares about children or somebody cares about a particular cause that your organization addresses. Okay, now I'm done.
Yeah, Lisa, again, thank you for your expertise. And so we have a wide range of topics we can discuss. And Delphia, again, I want to go back to you now. You've had some time to think about this while also giving us great advice and information about plan giving. You've suggested on collaboration that board members often need to be engaged. You've seen examples where executive directors make the first phone call to one another and kind of put the big parameters in place. Then the staff works out the details. I'm a fundraiser. I'm collaborating with Sarah's nonprofit. How do we talk about the money? If the donations are coming in, who shares how much? What does that conversation look like?
Well, Bill, that's part of that process that I was telling you about that we had to work out. And let me just say this, and I am going to answer the question. one of the things that we did, we went to a local foundation because we knew there were going to be administrative fees that had to be covered. And so we actually got them to agree to cover the administrative fees because even they were thrilled that we were doing a collaborative joint fundraising. So that was the first step. And the second step that we did, we established a what we call a grants committee, and it was composed of people from the Greater Houston Community Foundation, the United Way, and maybe just a community person, so that as the funds came in, they would sit down weekly. And I'm sure this wasn't easy. They never told, what went on at those committees was kind of like what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. So they never told us anything that went on, but when they came out, they had how the money would be distributed to which agencies and which programs. And if they reached an impasse, we had created kind of a committee, for lack of a better word, that was kind of an appeals committee that was comprised of board members from each organization. And I don't think, at least at the time that I left, and they were almost at the end of distributing the money, that they ever had to appeal to that committee. So I think they were able to kind of look at where the needs were and then agree how the money would be dispersed.
Thanks, Delphia. That is a really, really neat story of collaboration and fundraising in this time of pandemic. Friends, we are nearing the top of the hour, so I'm just going to ask Delphia, Lisa, and Bill, if there are any final reflections you might like to share with our community of fundraisers here.
Let me be the first to say, do not stop asking. I recognize that I was talking to some clients on yesterday, and they were saying, well, we can't really go and ask people because lots of people have lost their jobs. That's true, but there are lots of people who haven't. And I think that it's not about asking people, it's about giving people an opportunity to invest in the community and what's important to the community and what's important to them. So it's kind of like, if you don't ask, you don't get. So if anything, I don't care how bleak it looks.
I think you lost us.
Yeah. Delphia, I think you just froze for a minute, so let's turn it over to Lisa, and you can come back in if you're back with us. Lisa.
Thank you. I totally agree with Delphia. You don't stop asking. The one thing I would say is maybe different with planned giving than with outright fundraising, where you might do that collaboratively. I think planned giving, personally, I think it ought to stay specific to the organization, because it's such a highly legal, it has such a legal aspect, and you really don't want there to be any questions later on down the road about where the money's going to be going. If you want to do a planned giving, if you have such a collaborative relationship with another nonprofit, and you want to do some sort of planned giving thing together, then you're going to have two separate bequests in that they need to leave X percent of their estate to this nonprofit and X percent to that nonprofit. But I think it's much simpler if you just keep it simple. So I'm not as comfortable with planned giving stuff being done collaboratively, except where maybe a community foundation is involved in the way that Delphia was describing. But even two collaborating nonprofits, not so much on the planned giving.
Thanks, Lisa. Delphia, did you want to finish your thought?
Just can you keep giving and keep stewarding, because that's really important, and don't get discouraged.
And Sarah, I would interject quickly, and then I would invite you, please conclude here today. As you notice, we are heading towards the top of the hour. In my nonprofit leadership career, I have been part of collaborations. I've even been part of mergers, and would just echo what Delphi has had to say. Donors actually reward us for this. Donors want to maximize the impact of their gifts. And when they see nonprofits working together collaboratively, they know there can be efficiency there and greater impact. And I've seen that personally in my own career. So I just wanted to amplify that point as people look for collaboration opportunities in their local communities or wherever their footprint might lead them. As for planned giving, I would also say too, we always hear the stories, and Delphi has shared one today, and Lisa alluded to some as well, of big 6-figure and 7-figure planned gifts. And you're thinking, okay, I don't have donors at that level. Would you accept a planned gift of $1,000? Would you accept a planned gift of $2,500? If not, you see my banner, send them our way. At the fundraising school, we're glad to have those gifts. And remember, the donor is donating within their capacity. Generosity is not just the big number gifts,
Right.
It's gifts that are generous to that donor. So don't think you're off the hook with planned giving. Planned giving needs to be part of everyone's fundraising plan, regardless of the size of your nonprofit, regardless of the capacity of the donors to give. And Sarah, I'm just so thrilled that Delphi and Lisa are on our faculty at the fundraising school. And again, we invite you to look us up at philanthropy.iupui.edu/the fundraising school. Sarah, a delight to co-host with you today, and best wishes to everybody tuning in today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. On behalf of our colleagues at the fundraising school, we'll see you next month for the next conversation with TFRS at your desk. Take care, everyone.